Thank you for joining us. You're watching Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. Today we shall speak a little bit about my alma mater, the International Islamic University of Malaysia, IIUM or UIA, pretty much known across the country as such. Here we are trying to discuss how it takes a lot of effort over a long time to build talents across the board through oratory excellence. And what does that mean? That means talking about debating, public speaking, talks about mooting. And of course, I've asked, or I have solicited some of your views about what you want to ask the rector of UIA this evening. And if there's some questions that I can go through very shortly. Of course, IIUM is celebrating their has celebrated their 35th anniversary. They've come up with some interesting literature, if I can just focus in on this one. So this talks about some of the key highlights of what has happened throughout the university. And of course, the author of this book is joining us for this evening's discussion, leading the way. May I invite, or I'd like to be happy to introduce Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dzulkifli Abdul Razak. Tan Sri Zul, again, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with us. Let's talk a little bit about the ongoings of IIUM. How has the university been under your, tutelage over the past few years? What will be the expectations moving forward, at least for this year?
Well, since I came on board 18 months ago, we've been looking at the university as an international Islamic university. I think that two words there has its own significance and its own meaning. How international, how Islamic? I think this is the question that we are grappling with. And the last 8 months, we have been defining that to a certain extent. International means the university must be involved in international agenda, global agenda. And one of the things that we brought in quite a big way is the whole idea of sustainable development goal, climate change, and how does that then fit into this whole idea of Islam? How does Islam view sustainable development, climate change and stuff like that, which are basically part and parcel of our daily kind of commitment to it. So the last 18 months, we have kind of shift our orientation a little bit, in the sense that the university must be engaged with the community around us. And we have crafted among ourselves 29 flagship programs, beginning from cleaning up the water until working with the community, the Aborigines community, and so on and so forth. So that has been the preoccupation for the last 18 months. And just yesterday, we have been wrapping up with what are the achievements that we've made. And alhamdulillah, I think we have made quite a good break in the context of getting the university to be recognized internationally on those grounds, not just on Islamic grounds, and also contributing into the definitions of sustainable development. For example, we bring in the context of Maqasid Sharia. How does that gel in? How this the Rahmatan lil Alamin, mercy for all, gelled into sustainable development. So that has been the intellectual, quote unquote, plus practical application as far as I am concerned, and we hope that will be the trigger to move forward.
I mean, it sounds very exciting. In fact, from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals conversation that was held late last year, the minister in the Prime Minister's Department in charge of Religious Affairs, Mujahid Rawa, argues that Rahmatan lil Alamin is very much in tandem with UN Sustainable Goals, and therefore it's easy to, I guess, map the 27 UN SDG agendas or goals with that of Maqasid Sharia. The problem here is, of course, when you think about lofty ideals and lofty goals, it's all about execution. How well, or how ill-equipped, for that matter, do you think that the communities within Malaysia and of the members within IIUM is equipped or well facilitated to have the necessary tools to execute these kind of lofty goals?
I think it is not impossible, in the sense that if you talk about Islamic perspective, Islamic worldview, that has been there for a long time. For example, when you talk about Rahmatan lil Alamin, I mean, the university has been singing this song for the last 30 years, for heaven's sake, Rahmatan lil Alamin was just introduced by the new government maybe a couple of months ago. So it has been part and parcel of the university in many ways. It's a question of now, how do you orientate it to make it good? So, for example, when you talk about Rahmatan lil Alamin, how much are we reaching to the local public, for example? How much of knowledge transfer has been given to Kampung Sungai Pusu or the orang asli? What are the things that they need? And we begin to learn from them some of the notions of sustainable development in the orang asli punya community are still very much pristine.
Yes, of course.
And we need to take that back, become mainstream as far as sustainable development. It's not a dominant thing from quote-unquote modernity, and indigenous role do not have any role in this.
Yeah.
So
Just to give context, the main campus of IIUM is located in Gombak.
Exactly.
It is within Sungai Pusu locality, and there's a lot of Orang Asli community there.
Exactly.
All right. What attracted my point just now was to be recognized globally is also part of the agenda of the university.
Yeah.
But I find time and again that IIUM is absent from the QS ranking. I also take note that you've written a rather long piece about QS ranking, but that question keeps on cropping up. Why isn't UIA part of that conversation of QS ranking?
Well, a university is not a one-size-fits-all. In other words, there are many models of university, and certainly an Islamic university take a different stance altogether. For example, when we talk about IIUM, the four things that we always talk about, the amanah, for example, which is very key. And no university that I've been talk about amanah in the passionate way that we talked about. Rahmatan lil alamin, about humanity. Most universities just talk about their own locality and where they are. So if we start to shift into another criteria that is defined by somebody else for us, then we may lose some of the very essence of what IIUM is all about. So rather than saying that let's go and change our vision or our focus because we want to fit into somebody else's ranking, we might as well devise another one. And indeed, this is what we are trying to do now, to define what an Islamic university, in fact, what is a modern university in 21st century looks like. What QS is doing, from my point of view, is defining a university at a level of the 20th century, the industrial age kind of a university. University is seen like a factory, and you begin to count numbers, KPIs, and this and that, whereas we want to open that up a little bit and talk about the intangibles at the same time. So when I talk about community engagement, how do you define that? You know, it's just because you cannot measure it and you don't engage in university. So these are the very taxing questions that we are looking at, and putting IIUM in a different pedestal altogether rather than joining the bandwagon of QS, which to me is a commercial drive anyway.
But while I understand that this would be some of the key features you want to stand apart from the others, do you think that there would be a set of challenges on its own right when you want to say that you want to be internationally recognized, but it's not using the same parameters as the rest of the world is using? Do you think that there would be some challenges in that?
I think there's a misperception that most of the world that I know of when I'm engaged with them, they don't look at ranking for QS particularly as something which is quote-unquote lofty.
Yeah.
You know, there are other rankings that are more quote-unquote objective in this particular sense, that they will prefer that as compared to US. And QS is much more acceptable in this part of the region because we are less critical about QS. You know, at one time, if you remember, QS and Times were together and then they split. Why do they split? They split because of the criteria they don't agree with, and some of us still do not agree. For example, 40% of QS evaluation is on perception. You know, and perception is very, very,
I guess, intangible.
Soft,
yeah.
You know, and we don't think that's objective enough to get into, particularly in a third world country when people do not know you. And when they ask for perception, they say, well, we don't know. Sometimes they don't even know where the country is. So those are issues that I think we are not comfortable with. If you want to go for ranking, we'll go something which is more objective and more robust in that particular sense.
All right. I continue my conversation with the Rector of IIUM, Tan Sri Dzul, after this. I am with Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, the Rector of the International Islamic University Malaysia. We are on the conversation of how this university is rising head and shoulders above others in trying to build, I guess, profitable, functioning, and most importantly, effective community leaders in and around the country. So Tan Sri Dzul, we left off before the break talking about the QS ranking, but of course the general theme of our conversation is also about recognition of what you guys do, which is again a little bit different from how other universities and other institutions of higher learning is doing. There was a little anecdote that you wanted to share with us. Let's hear this story out.
Well, when we talk about ranking per se, we want to exhibit or at least tell the world what we are good at. You know, just because you have 4 criteria that you missed out what we are good at doesn't mean we are not good.
Yeah.
So in the context of debate, oratory excellence that you talked about, there is something that we have excelled. Over the last 30 years, I think that's been developed over time. And now I think it's almost synonymous when you talk about debate, dissenting, public speaking. IIUM is always there.
Yeah.
And I don't think until now there's any local university, even regional university at this point can match what we have performed over the last 30 years. And I think that is a kind of a hallmark that is not easy to get given QS ranking or otherwise.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about, this is a nice segue, Tan Sri, in terms of the conversation of my initial idea of bringing you in. Because we didn't want to talk about, QS ranking per se. We wanted to talk about how UIA or IIUM is building its core strength in terms of IIUM debating and oratory excellence. I'm a product of that, I have to admit, and I'm proud to admit that. We have the world's youngest minister. At that point in time, of course, now the world has seen even younger prime ministers.
Exactly.
But the idea here is that when you talk about debating and when you talk about public speaking and oratory excellence and mooting for that matter for the law undergrads, you're talking about not just the prowess of speaking out in public, it's also being able to critically think. It's about trying to understand better how you prepare as a debater, as a public speaker, and most importantly, very, very importantly, in fact, trying to listen more than you talk, because how else can you argue accordingly and argue not to win, but argue to get the best point forward if you don't listen. Much of the conversation that we're having now is that we're actually listening to each other more than we are talking to each other. Right. This kind of skill is not an overnight thing for you to build. Just like any other skill, you talk about it being honed over years, from high school, from matriculation or CFS as you call it, and of course the 4 years of undergraduate, and many others of our friends and colleagues and fellow students continue to do this even when they are undergraduates studying in IIUM. This is a long story, and UIA is not letting up into this kind of conversation. In fact, UIA is doubling down its efforts and pardon my pun of using a gambling metaphor, but yes, doubling down on its efforts in trying to build a greater prospect of undergraduates and postgraduates that is excelling in this. Do you think that there is a clear definition of how you want to take this even further? Do you think that there would be a time and place for us to actually put down markers and say, you know what, it's as much as we can build students and excel in this area, there needs to be better engagement with the community. Funding is a big problem. I guess, it's a big thing for us to discuss. Maybe alumni can chip in. There's another way of doing things. What would be the next step for debate in IIUM?
Yeah, unfortunately, unlike you, I'm not an alumni of IIUM, but I'm proud to be the rector now.
You are very much the IIUM family.
Coming from the outside, I think one of the things that strikes me as far as the debating is concerned, from my point of view, this is what university is all about. It's not just standing on stage speaking. I think university is about this debating as a culture of its own. Even though you don't have a debating team, for example, the university must engage in debates. The university must start to question and have dissenting views and agree to disagree. These are all the thing that is important to make a university a university. Now, if you don't have that, then I think university is almost like a high school or even worse than that you just listen, and sometimes you listen just to regurgitate it. You don't actually think about it. So this whole phenomena of debate, the way I look at it, it allows students, first of all, to be courageously enough to speak their mind. And I think we don't have that. Half of our students just listen, and after that, solo, and they moved out.
Passive.
Yes, very passive. Secondly, it's about critically thinking. I can have a different point of view, and it doesn't matter. I don't have to agree with you, and I can be comfortable of that. You may be a politician, you may be a minister, a prime minister. I can still disagree with you, and we can still remain friends. And I think we don't have that also. In Malaysia, if you disagree, suddenly you're my enemy, and I need to dump you down for one reason or the other. So that spoils the whole idea of knowledge seeking. Suppose the whole idea of trying to get, building a leader, as it were, So this phenomena of debates that you see in IIUM is a cultural thing that has expanded from one kuliah into now multi-kuliah and now going beyond Malaysia into other parts of the world, which I think is a development that no other university can match because it is not planned that way. And I think you are lucky in the sense that this has been part of the culture, and only that I hope it becomes part and parcel of a daily living, that we can still have this argument within the university, between lecturers and students, between rectors and staff, and we still remain the same. And that's how the university moved up. So this debate to me is a good platform that everybody later on should be able to participate. So we are trying to demystify this whole idea of debating being an event that everybody must come to to a stage and applaud and stuff. We wanted to make it something that everybody practices every day. Okay. You can sit in the canteen and you can debate. There's nothing wrong with it.
All right, we'll talk a little bit about the demystification of debate, but that happens right after this break. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying on with us. You're watching Notepad. I am with the Rector of IIUM, Sri Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, talking about the idea of IIUM being the champion of oratory excellence. Speaking of which, there is a competition that is coming up very, very soon. Can I just pull up the particular graphic? This is, of course, the Asian Arabic Debating Championship happening towards the end of this month, early next month here, in fact, in Gombak, Selangor. Tan Sri, if I can just pull back to this particular event. We talk about IIUM being a debating institution. Normally people would assume, okay, fine, it's English, it is Malay, not normally people associate it with Arabic. Would these kind of events be a critical, I guess, showcase highlight to tell the world that you guys are more than just, English and Malay?
Yes, certainly. I think this is something that I discovered in the university. With 100 nations being represented in the university, I mean, we can speak more than 100 languages. Of course, there are small committees speaking that. But the whole idea that knowledge language diversity in the university is not something that we should frown on. It's not just English or Bahasa Malaysia or Arabic. It's all together. How do you mix this? And this is where I think IIUM is an icon for this. We are good in English, we are good in Arabic, we are certainly good in Bahasa Malaysia. And whatever else that you need us to do, definitely we can do it, because the culture of speaking, the culture of debating, the culture of articulating is there. It's a matter of picking up the language and then, delivering it the way it is to be. So it is no difficulty the way we look at English now, as though it's so difficult to overcome English. But people who can speak Arabic cannot speak English. Sometimes it demystifies me, because it's more difficult to learn Arabic as compared to English. So it's a perception of the mind, I think, rather than anything else.
Let's talk about some of the perceptions or misperceptions that is befuddling the public in terms of the debating community here. Do you think that it's time for you guys to step out and say, you know what, everyone is welcome. It's not a scary, I guess, event. It's a thrashing of ideas and a sharing of knowledge. It's nothing of this elitist kind of notion. What kind of the biggest misperceptions that you have to combat in terms of making debating a little bit more pedestrian and a little bit more approachable for the average person?
Yeah, I come from a different cohort. When I was a student 40 years ago, it's a question of space. I was a student in the early 70s when the AWANI wasn't there. It's a question of space. We speak our mind. There's a speaker's corner that everybody takes part, sometimes it is rebellious, but more often than not, it's a question of just communicating ideas from the youngsters to another youngsters. And this is where we pick language. I mean, I don't learn language from a book. I learn language from speaking it as and when I understand it. But after a while, you get into the groove, you got the courage, you learn the confidence, your English somehow or other becomes better over a period of time. I always look at speaking is like playing football, Brian. You can read as many books as you want on how to be a good footballer. If you go down to you don't go down to the field and start kicking the balls, you'll never be a good footballer. It's something like that. I mean, if you just learn how to be a good English speaker but never speak, and because there's no space for you to speak, and worst thing, because you have fear. There's a kind of fear to speak out your mind, and then you get locked in and you never get to practice your
But the fear
language.
is founded, at least during the era of the University Act being in place, and it was in place for a few decades.
Yeah.
Do you think that because of the removal of the University Act, or AWKU for its short form, this will precipitate the kind of conversations that you've seen 40 years ago?
I certainly hope so, but the kind of thing that I test with my students here, sometimes I tell them, look now, the AWKU is no longer there, and maybe some of the provision that will be removed. In fact, positions sometimes be removed, but they still don't understand. It's almost like we are caged for the last 40 years. Now I open the door to the cage and you do not know how to fly. We are so used to that cage, and your world is that cage. To fly out, it takes another form of courage. It takes another form of skills to move out. I think that's the one that we are trying to build now. To tell the student it's okay to speak as long as you do it rationally, academically, as long as you're not inciting or making other people uncomfortable. You are okay to do this. That's the level that we are getting into at the moment in time. Opening up and giving more space for them to speak out, and to make sure that they are quote-unquote protected in that particular sense.
Tan Sri, it seems that if I can just generally, use some general broad themes of your conversation here, is that you're trying to build a culture. You're touching a little bit on the culture of debate. You're now touching the culture of fear, culture of passiveness, and how, this culture has to change.
Yes.
And just like in any culture that you want to engineer, it might take time.
Yes.
Do you think that we have the time now to actually engineer a more active kind of conversation instead of this passive learning, a little bit more active learning? Do you think that we have the time, or we need to aggravate and perhaps incentivize people to do more now so that we can make this speed along a little bit faster?
Well, this is where I think the debaters becomes a role model. They are into this, they know what to do, and the moment people see how these people perform and how they are quote-unquote protected in that particular sense, I mean, some of the students are still skeptical. Do I say this? Will you victimize me and stuff like that? We need to demonstrate they are open enough as far as it is concerned. So these debating activities that we're having is basically a kind of a symbol or a metaphor to tell them, yes, you can speak, it doesn't really matter as long as you do it in the right way in the context of the academic. Yeah. But the basic of it, Ibrahim, is basically education is about building culture. Education is not just about employment and probability passing exam. Education is about building culture, building civilization. And I thought this is what Malaysia wants. When you talk about the year 2020, we're supposed to be at this kind of a level that we are different from somebody else. Our culture is different. We are more refined. We have a lot more finesse. Not the kind of way that we see today.
You're not a talent factory. That's not what you are.
No. And also the kind of social media, the kind of hyping between one another. I mean, this is something that is not, I would imagine, in the year 2020. We might not arrive at 2020, but at least our culture is more refined at this particular stage, which I don't see this at all. So this is where I thought education, quote-unquote, mind my language, has failed.
Right.
We have diverted education into something which is not supposed to be. And now this year is a year which I think is a very inflection year, because UNESCO is starting to redefine what education is all about in the context of global warming, climate change, and all these disparities that we have. You just listen to the first day of World Economic Forum today. It's the same issue that we need to settle. It's not about passing exams alone. I mean, that's important.
It's economic mobility, it's climate change, it's gender inequality, and so on.
Exactly. And it's just not economics now. You may be good in economics, but you need to balance with other things. This whole idea of trying to balance is about what debating is all about, I think. Critically evaluating and giving a kind of a balanced opinion, a considered opinion, rather than emotionally bursting out just because you want to make a point. So this is a whole culture that I think we need to build in when we talk about education, and I think IIUM is there.
Right. Still, there's a lot more to be done, I'm pretty sure. Again, IIUM is celebrating its 35th anniversary. I don't know whether we can zoom in on this book. There's plenty of activities currently happening there in the university. Of course, the upcoming event, the Arabic competition, debate competition is also taking place at the end of the month. Do check that out. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad. These kind of interviews can be found there. You can also watch this interview on your mobile devices. Just download the AWANI app wherever you get your application. And of course, this interview can also be listened to on podcasts. Again, search for AWANI wherever you get your podcasts. That's my conversation for this evening with Sri Dzulkifli Abdul Razak. He is the Rector of IIUM. Until next time, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.